This is Changemakers with Katie Gore, finding the right solutions for the affordable housing community.
This week's Changemaker is Tiffany Dickerson, who is known as the Housing Highlighter. Tiffany helps public housing authorities communicate with clarity and purpose, and through her company Interest Platforms, she partners with agencies to strengthen their voice and help advance the cause of affordable housing. Welcome to the Changemakers podcast. Tiffany, it is a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Katie. It is an honor to be considered a change maker and to be here with you today.
Let's just start with basically how you came into affordable housing. I read that you started in resident services, which actually seems very, very divine in many cases for what you're now doing. But let's go back a few steps and tell us how you got started in affordable housing.
Well, let's see. It's a very unconventional journey that I made it to affordable housing. When I got out of college, I was not destined for affordable housing. I actually was an adult probation and parole officer for 5 years, I believe. And that was a job that I loved. And being that we're military, my husband's military, we move around a lot. So it just so happened that after I had my first child, I was a stay-at-home mom, and I ended up moving back to the area that I grew up in. So I came in contact with an individual from the Goldsboro Housing Authority, and she was talking to me about how she had a Ross grant and that someone on the staff had left and that she needed to fill the role, but there was only 1 year left on the contract. And she said, we're having trouble because, nobody wants to work for, just a year. And, without the insurity of knowing that they're going to be able to, stay on full time. And she was like, if you're interested, you might be perfect with your case management background and probation. And I said, okay. And mind you, I had been a stay-at-home mom for like 6 years at that time. So going into housing, that was my first step inside an affordable housing complex. I hadn't visited the area or anything of that nature. So within that first week of working, I was like, wow, you guys do so much. And why doesn't anybody know about this?
Mm-hmm.
And so it just so happened that, as I worked in resident services and as the assistant Ross grant coordinator, I got the opportunity to meet so many residents, to, really engage with them, to create flyers, to create newsletters, to host events and, stuff of that nature. And when the Ross grant was up, Mr. Goodson at the time, the CEO, he was very impressed with my work and he wanted me to stay on in a different role, even though I was moving. And so I was happy. I took the opportunity and that shifted me from really working inside resident services with residents, but allowed me to stay in the background and handle their social media, handle their newsletters, all the admin stuff. And also was able to help with, just resident engagement ideas. And so basically he just put me on the map. He started telling all the housing authorities that he knew that you needed a Tiffany in your, back pocket. And so that's what made me create a business around it.
So why do you think, in your own words, why do you think it's so important that housing authorities craft their message?
Because for so long, it's been deemed as the slums, the projects, where crime happens, drugs are infested. It's just low income, low poverty, and nobody is trying to do any better than what they are. And I didn't see that when I was there. And I feel like I was so amazed at the work, the impact that the housing authority was having, that I wanted to be the person that told the story. I wanted everybody to be amazed that, what housing authorities actually do, the work that they're doing outside of just, providing housing.
Mm-hmm. And so many times that negative flash is what's heard. And like you mentioned, the stories heard are they're the bad ones. And so the bad story hits the headline, or what I like to say, above the fold, and the good stuff gets buried. And that's what I believe is so wonderful about what you're doing, is you're saying, there's bad, but there's good. And let's make sure there's a microphone for both, because the bad needs to be addressed. No doubt about it. All the stories when an elevator doesn't work, or, there's somebody that drives through the property and does, bad things. Those do need to be talked about. So solutions and programs and enforcement and all the things can try
Yes.
to address that. But on balance, we also need to know how it's working. And that's really, really what I appreciate about what you're doing. And tell us, for example, because I'm sure you've had to handle both the bad stories and the good ones, but tell us, let's talk about some of the good ones first.
Okay.
Because we can all point to a bad one. And we'll get to some of that, because I want to hear on how you handle that. But let's talk about the good ones first. Do you have some success stories of working with housing authorities that you really want to share with us? You don't have to name the housing authority, but maybe talk about some examples or some projects or some scenarios that you'd like to share with us.
I would say that a lot of the housing authorities that I actually contract with are doing some phenomenal things, from the youth build program to all the self-sufficiency programs, even just seeing some of how the agencies and their resident services team or their Ross coordinators are boots on the ground. I think that is very important in the communities that we serve, getting out and creating those relationships so that, individuals know that you care, that you're supported, and that you're listening to them as well. And I think that some of the resident services programs that are happening that are so positive would be realizing that an individual doesn't have their license and don't have, the transportation to get back and forth, or they're dependent upon, buses. And sometimes those buses don't run at the hours that you need them to run for you to get to work. So, looking at that in a complex and figuring out a way to solve it. And so some of our housing authorities actually offer, basic driver's classes so that their residents can actually learn on site how to, pass the driver's education course, as well as, get their license so that they can, be a driver. I think that's very important. Also with the credit programs, financial literacy, these are all the initiatives that are, big, that I believe helps the residents where they are. You got programs like Booktacular, where, they switch from it being just Halloween, but they give out books and promote early literacy. And that's one of my big things too. Have a nonprofit that promotes early literacy, and, being a part of the book rich environment. That's, you know, a huge endeavor for some of the housing authorities that I work with. And um, the scholarships. Never knew that, housing authorities offer scholarships. Some of my housing authorities, they actually give back to their feeder schools, where their kids are, going for elementary, middle school, and high school. They actually provide, financial resources to the actual school itself to help with their own initiatives. I think those are, huge.
Mhm. One of our prior podcast guests was from the Waco Housing Authority, and they talked about a scholarship program that they do every year. And it is amazing to hear how they bring youth and do college tours with them to really show them, hey, there's more than a community college, or hey, you actually have opportunity to go out of state or in state with certain different programs. And Waco I mean, they're just amazing about that. And some of these things, we want to say a housing authority is about, is the paint done, is the regulation done, is the file correct? That is all very, very fair, because that's why they're funded. But when you hear housing authorities do something like this, it is so encouraging, because it's really adding to the self-sufficiency, and it's helping that family unit say, okay, now your house is stable. Now can we focus on employment, health, education? And that's the beauty of affordable housing too. Um, how do you see a housing authority embrace talking about this? Like, what do you like, to get them from a mindset of saying, "Hey, we're just here about the file and the paint and the work order and all of that," but to like, how do you see them or how do you connect for them why I don't wanna say storytelling, so, but getting this message about what else they're doing, like, how do you see them transition and view that as important, or how do you talk to them about that?
So basically, I just let them know that whether you stay silent, there's somebody out there talking about you. Your resident is complaining online, or, one of your partners may actually have posted about one of your events that was a huge for them. And it should be something that you want to spotlight as well, but you're not on the scene, you're not
Okay.
going up online. And why? You're doing great things behind the scenes, but nobody knows about it. So if there's any way that you're going to shift the narrative, you have to speak
Okay.
up.
Mhm.
And some of my agencies have seen some very positive impact from just their media,
Mhm.
since they have started posting online and being more social. We've had some housing authorities where, of course, crime is going to happen, things are going to happen, but now instead of already blaming it being the housing authority's property, we've had media actually come and say, "Hey, we know you guys are doing so much good stuff.
Yeah.
Did this really happen in your,
Mhm.
neighborhood? Did this
Mhm.
really happen in your community?" Or, you know, um, when housing authorities, when people comment and say, "Hey, I never knew that you did all this," or you have residents from other communities commenting like, "Hey, I wish we all had this in our neighborhood," or can a regular citizen that's not even a housing authority resident, can we participate in this initiative that you have in this event? I think those are, huge ways for housing authorities to see that, speaking up and telling as much positive as you possibly can, it helps to balance whenever something negative hits. It makes people question, hey, I wonder if that's even true because we see so much good that, "And I can't believe this, is happening."
Mhm. And, it's human nature. If somebody gives you one negative thing and, you forget the five positive things. I mean, this is really, really a human nature. But there's something different, though, about a housing authority and how that they're often portrayed as the bad guy. They're portrayed as the entity that can't do anything wrong, and then there's this, like, whole mob, once one story's written, then there's, like, 12 stories written, and there's a dynamic here, and I don't know what that's called. I don't know what that is, but I just having worked at a housing authority myself and, having been in this industry for 3 decades, there's just some dynamic that's like, "Let's make the housing authority the bad guy." And, sometimes, that is at their own doing because they haven't followed the rules and regulations. But other times that's because they've also not told, hey, this is what we are doing right. Hey, look at the property. It is looking great. We have new landscaping, we have new doors, we have new roofs. And okay, yeah, somebody drove through and hit the sign. However, we're gonna fix it, and, but there's pieces that are missing, and that's what I really appreciate about what you're doing is you're trying to fill in those gaps for them. And, do housing authorities I mean, do from your perspective, once they engage with you, like, what are they saying as an organization or a leadership team? Like, what's the first things that they say after they've started to see the value?
I didn't know this was possible, is usually what they say. I didn't know how to tell the story, how just to be
Mhm.
consistent made a difference. They thought their website was just enough. And, unfortunately, your website is a good initiative, but it's not enough, especially when it becomes the real time. I saw a lot of housing authorities actually want to get online during COVID. That's when they realized that, "Oh my, I need a way to communicate, and, my website isn't enough," especially if you don't have things on your website that allow you to reach out to your residents in that real time. But everybody's on social media, when we're in our cars and we're driving somewhere and we wanted to decide on where we're going to eat at, we're looking at Google reviews and we're going to Facebook pages, Instagram to look at the pictures of the food that we may be, interested in eating. And that's the same way, residents applicants are looking at housing authorities. When they apply to your area, they've already checked out most of, what you're showing on your social media. They're seeing the programs that they may want to be a part of. So I definitely believe that when housing authorities reach out and we start working together, they do see the impact. They do see the good. I've heard CEOs tell me that, hey, I didn't even know that was going on in my town, or I didn't even know that was going on in my agency. But, people keep coming up to me saying, hey, man, I didn't know you did all that. And, the CEO is like, yeah, we do, but they don't follow the page themselves, so it's like they have no clue either, but, they're getting the positive and the praise out in the community, and, you know, I'm the one that's doing all the talking. They just send me information and I just put it out and make it positive for them.
Yeah. So it's there's an awareness piece that they're not aware of either their presence or their messaging or they're letting somebody else tell the story. I mean that's what I'm hearing you say. And then there's also this engagement piece where they have to decide whether they want to take control of that narrative and make sure more than just the bad is being said. Um, I'm sure you do this so much that you probably can take a real good dashboard and say, I see what the problems are.
Mhm.
Um, are there any are there, for somebody who doesn't have the awareness, a housing authority that maybe doesn't have the awareness, or how would you move them from not having the awareness to saying, okay, I think I need to do something? Like, is there a self-test that they can to step back without needing the crisis, without needing the problem here? Like, is there something that they can self-test and say, "Maybe we should consider this?" What would you tell them to do?
When they realize that the residents and the community, the stakeholders, the cities, do not know what's happening at their agency, when
Okay.
they're ready to apply for a grant or they need buy-in from other partners and um, the city mostly is when they, realize that, hey, we haven't been telling our story because we go to these meetings and nobody knows anything about what we're doing and they're all in amazement. So that's why I push, even for the smallest agency, you don't have to get on every, platform to, make your housing authority's positive stand out. Just show up and be consistent. A policy, a plan, and a phone can take you a long way, and, that's what we're seeing. That's what I try to push that, just get out there and be consistent. Tell, your story, tell what's going on behind the scenes, just show up so that, individuals, the residents, the city, your partners know that you are here and that you are doing good things.
Mhm. This is a tricky one, and I've had many developers on the podcast. I've had housing authorities, I've had nonprofits, and this is a tricky one for everybody. But I have to ask you also is, you know, what when a community wants to build new affordable housing, they're inherently everybody braces for the controversy. Everybody braces for the resistance, for the struggle. Do you have ways that you can help housing authorities or developers or community partners, whoever they are? Do you have ways that you can help encourage them to navigate that resistance?
Um, I'm not sure if I do or not. I would like to believe that, just stepping out in front and
Mhm.
letting people know, hey, let me know what your concerns are. Let the residents, the community know, hey, this is how we're tackling what your issue is. If you don't want, a mixed income unit because you're afraid that the individual that is low income is going to bring down the whole neighborhood, let us show you, some other agencies that have done this successfully.
Right.
And let's look at that. Even if we have to take a trip, the city council has to go on a trip to look at, your choice neighborhoods, your moving to work programs, or, a housing authority that has just built in a city. Let's take these initiatives and do it. Let's start from, answering all the questions, make it, even though there may be some bad, that's going to come along with it, at least show up and talk and state that you're aware that these are the concerns, but this is how you are handling it.
Mhm.
Let's show the, behind the scenes, what you're talking about, how you're answering these questions in your, you know, in your meetings. Yeah.
I think that is what everybody is. I mean, the resistance and how you plan for that and how you communicate that makes a difference because I have talked about the fear versus fact component of it. If the fear is crime, then, you can confront it with the facts, right? Or if the fear is parking, congestion, traffic, well, then you can confront it with the facts of, there's less traffic than, the grocery store that's down the street, right? So, or if it's aesthetics, like so many times it's, we don't want the property to look bad. Well, then that is a perfect moment for community partnership to say, all right, let's have it blend and be better. Let's create awnings. Let's create, whatever the pieces are, parking in the back versus parking in the front, whatever the pieces are here. And in that example, the beauty is when people can drive by and not know it's affordable housing. And that is what the process should look like, is for the community to come in and say, we don't want the congestion, we don't want the crime, we don't want the aesthetics of it. But hopefully the housing agency is navigating their own development, or that entity is navigating the development in such a way that they can respond. But it's having you help them navigate that is really makes a difference because you're not attached to the developer and the housing authority, but you're also not the community. And so you really can help fill those gaps and facilitate that. And we need that. I mean, we need a person like you to step in that role to help hear both sides of the scenario. And I appreciate what you're doing for the housing authority because at the end of the day is we want really good housing. We want people to be able to live and work in their communities. We want a stabilizing moment for people to have rent that is appropriate to their wages. And so to have you help solve some of that is amazing. Um, I also saw a post that you made on LinkedIn, and I love the forum there. You said that a housing authority, and I'm gonna summarize it here so you can fix it here after I say it. But you said something about a housing authority wanting the community to trust them, but you called out the housing authority and said that they needed to start inside their agency first. So tell us more about that.
Well, that post was basically just centered around, internal communications. They matter just as much as external because, from the top down, if, your leadership is, not listening to what, your property managers, your maintenance workers,
Yeah.
your lawn care, people are saying because they're interacting with the residents and they hear things and they see things. And if you're not listening to them and you don't give them an environment where they can speak up and they feel, trusted and they feel like supported in their jobs, that's going to carry over into how they treat the residents. And we do not want that. We want it to be a warm environment. We want, your residents, when they come in to ask questions, for even if you don't have the answer, to find it and want to contact that resident and let them know what the answer is. So I feel like, if you just start asking your staff that's on the ground what residents are saying, what problems that they are noticing within their communities, what are they complaining about the most? That's where you can start with your content, build your content around, the questions that are being asked to your property managers when they come in. If they don't understand how, they pay rent, or they don't understand, the HUD flat rent notices that they're getting, let's break it down into bite-sized pieces so that everybody can understand online.
Hmm. Are there a couple of really good examples of housing authorities who are doing it right that you would want to brag on? A little like saying, do you have a favorite child at the moment? So that may not be a fair question, but if people are listening and saying, well, I thought we were doing it fine. I mean, is there something that they could go out and compare and say, oh, compared to theirs, maybe I'm not doing it fine.
I can actually probably brag on most of the agencies that I'm working with. I would say that when it comes to resident services, Goldsboro Housing Authority is one of the top notch. They go above and beyond, and they really try to make their residents feel supported.
Mm-hmm.
When it
That's
comes to
Goldsboro, North Carolina,
yes,
right? Okay.
yes, yeah.
Mhm.
Now, when it comes to the Ross program, you can't get any better than Laurel Housing Authority in Mississippi.
Oh, yes.
They are amazing. If you're trying to get resident engagement, if you're trying to get um, your residents to feel wanted and needed and that their voice matters, then I would go talk to those ladies, those Ross coordinators in Laurel.
Mhm.
Um,
Shout out to Ulrich Young there in Laurel, Mississippi,
yes,
right? So
and I would say, if you're wondering how to get your community partners to show up for you, because I mean, one of the issues that, a lot of housing authorities have is they don't have enough staff when it comes to certain, initiatives. They may want to be more, they want to they may want to do more, but they don't just have the staff and the time. So
right.
Auburn Housing Authority in Alabama, they do a great job with making sure their partners are a part of everything. For example, I'll tell you one of their tricks is um, they start at the end of the year, reaching out to their partners. They send like basically a blast to all their partners saying, hey, we're coming up on a new year. We really want you to be a part of our agency and help our residents next year. So let's go ahead and start putting stuff on the calendar. And pretty much their partners just start, chiming back in and replying, hey, I can do a 4-week financial literacy course, in the month of April, or I can do a home ownership program, that could be a local realtor, that said
Mhm.
I can do, show them how they could become homeowners.
Mhm.
So basically their calendar gets planned by their partners almost for the whole year.
Mhm.
And to me, that's very impressive, especially if you are 1 to 2 people, resident services team. They are actually utilizing their partners for more because the partners have the expertise. Why not let them come into your agency, your community centers, and help your residents?
Mhm. Mhm. We mentioned the good and the bad earlier when we first started talking, and we've gone through some strategies here to combat some of those myths or some of those problems with resistance. Are there other pitfalls that you see housing authorities in when we talk about improving their marketing or improving their stories, but are there pitfalls that you really really wish housing authorities would try to avoid? Like if you were going to talk to them right here and just say, please Stop. Please avoid these pitfalls. What would they be?
One, please stop deleting comments.
Ah, okay.
Pages.
Okay.
Don't turn off comments,
Mm.
don't hide comments, don't block comments, you're putting yourself in a legal, possibility, possibly a legal arraignment here if you do that. And social media is supposed to be social. So, even those bad comments, sometimes they can tell you about yourself, because, a resident that is often complaining that they keep calling your office and they're not getting any answers, that may mean you need to speak to one of your property managers or reach out to that number that they're calling to find out what's going on. Is one of your employees really just sending people to the voicemail and not returning calls because they don't want to be social or don't want to communicate? Sometimes your residents or the people out in the community do tell you things that you need to know. It's just a matter of whether you want to hear it or not. So turning off comments would be one thing that I would say do not do. Um, Also, let's move from using a bunch of emojis in your post because emojis are not necessarily accessible. If you're wanting your content to be viewed and read by individuals with disabilities, then you don't want to use a whole bunch of emojis, because when a screen reader reads that information, it's telling you what that emoji is along with the jargon or the caption that you've put in there. So let's limit, using emojis. Another thing I would say is this one may hurt some people, but you can almost tell when an agency, their CEO is running their social media.
Mm.
And you don't want that. The housing authority is a team effort.
Mm-hmm.
Every post that you make shouldn't be about what the CEO is doing, you know? That is something that I would say, make sure, you do not do. It's okay to talk about your CEO sometime, or
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
talk about the
Right.
initiatives and the vision that they bring forth through the agency, but every post shouldn't be about the CEO. Every press release shouldn't be, the CEO's name inside of the headline.
Okay.
Um, what would be another thing that I would say? Oh, this is a big one. Flyers. Flyers on social media. Flyers are meant to be handed out.
Oh, yeah.
Posted on social media because most of the time they're not accessible.
Uh-huh.
Um, and it's better to utilize photos, real photos, not stock images. Just use photos from your residents if you have permission. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
no, even if you if you don't have permission, it's okay to ask, a resident if they're attending an event, if you can utilize get there and to sign off on it. But even if you're talking about your maintenance, the decor of your residence, the housing authority, the outside, the exterior, the grounds, you can go around and take pictures of that,
Right.
property and post it on social media. That works way better than a stock image of, somebody in a rural part of North Carolina posting a picture of what seems like New York. That doesn't fit.
Right.
So those are some of the things that I would say are big. Flyers is probably be one of the biggest, because you see a lot of agencies basically just using, their flyer as a way to communicate, and that's not good.
Mm-hmm.
Pass those flyers out. Go door to door, knock, and hand them out.
Yeah.
I actually have one more thing. Even in your newsletters, when you're, doing newsletters, even if you do them monthly, bi-monthly, quarterly, uh, let's move from a bunch of rental lease information,
Okay.
the do's and the don'ts,
Uh-huh.
and let's try to make it a little bit more fun, something
Mhm.
that they're actually going to pick up and look at.
Right.
And one of the things that I am big on is letting the residents see themselves on the inside of those newsletters,
Mm.
because it's been very efficient and beneficial for a resident to see themselves either on social media or in a newsletter. We've had people at agencies to call us and be like, "Hey, when is the next newsletter coming out? Because I know they took a picture of me or made a comment and basically they want to see themselves." It's almost like, you're going to see your child perform at, a at their school and you want to take pictures and you can't wait to get home and post them on social media because you want the likes and the loves and the comments or, oh, my baby is doing this.
Yeah.
Residents want that as well. Residents want to be, seen in pictures doing good things because those are your posts that are going to get shared throughout the community. Your self-sufficiency programs, your graduates, getting their stories and, just making them spotlighting them, making them a big deal. That really helps drive, engagement. Data matters, but human stories, they move the mark.
Mhm. There's something about attachment too. When and this is the core definition of community is that you want to have people engaged and attached to the community because that spills over in how people are investing,
Mhm.
how people are supportive, how people will say, "Hey, don't drop your trash on that," right? Like, get your kids to, do better and that community, that attachment to what's happening, being a part of that just it lifts other aspects of it. And it's like any other neighborhood too, where you've got grandma's watching out the window to see what's going on, right? Like, and you want that.
Right.
You want people to be attached to that. So, I that's a good thing when that happens.
Yes,
It's a good thing when they see themselves in the newsletter. It's a good thing when people want to say, I want to be a part of this movement and I want to help preserve what's happening here. That's a great validation of these communities that we're supporting. How do so we've got that, the good thing. Then on the other side is how do you handle the frustration of people who are putting in the Google comments or who people are saying, I've got resident confusion, resident frustrations, and I'm going to air out the grievance, in this way. And, and some of that can be very legitimate because they have tried the other way and it has worked.
right,
Or some of it is not legitimate because it's like, well, there's no record of you, this
right.
is the first I've heard of this.
Mhm. Yes.
So, how do you advise people to handle that?
So, first off, you just have to be professional because with me being on the, out on the side of getting those comments and seeing them, sometimes, you do take them to heart because you're
Yeah,
like, the agency didn't mean that, or I know that that's not their, thought process. But sometimes you just have to walk away from the comments that, bother you and
yeah,
come back when you are able to respond in a professional way. You want to make sure the resident or whoever is complaining or voicing their concerns, you want to make sure they're heard, you know. So you don't want to provoke them to do more in a
right,
sense. So, when you do comment or respond, thank them for, reaching out, thank them for letting you know what's happening, and tell them the process that you're going to do to move forward, and if that's reaching out to the staff member that they're trying to reach, or, hey, let me give you another number to contact so that you can,
right,
talk to the individual that you need to talk to. Maybe you're calling the wrong number, but we're not going to say you're doing wrong. We're just going to, help you, direct you, bring clarity to whatever question or issue that you're having so that not only are we professional, but you feel supported, you feel heard. We're transparent in what we're saying so that even if still are a little heated, at
yeah,
least you know that we answered, we are here, we did show up, we did, provide a response. Because sometimes, if the phone is ringing at the agency and nobody's picking up, they will come online because they see that you're posting, they see that you're being consistent in posting. So somebody has to be behind the post. So they'll reach out. And immediately when I get a comment like that, I reach out to someone at the agency that I know is gonna respond and say, "Hey, this is what I'm seeing, you know, do I need to direct them to a particular person, or, how are we gonna handle this?" So, yeah.
And you're talking about a process, you're talking about systems, you're talking about people, and any of those can have a glitch. And so there is a good, that comment is a good check and balance of the people, the process, and the system to see, hey, look, there's a gap. Hey, look, there's a glitch. Something happened, and I mean that's okay to QC those. I have two stories to share. One, I just ordered a birthday cake for a family member who's out of state, and I sent it. And I called the number to order the cake versus doing it online because I thought I want to call and deal with a person versus just going online. And it took over 30 minutes to order the cake because of hold times, routing times, excessive questions to order something super, super simple. And the frustration I had after that one phone call was like, boy, that was a bad move. And I think that's something so simple, like just ordering a birthday cake. But when people are handling people's housing and the threat of security and the threat of, am I going to lose my housing? And am I going to, is my rent going to go up? Like these are real, real threats that, and I'm thinking like my 30-minute phone call was something that was super minor and inconsequential. Think about, a 30-minute frustrating phone call where you've been put through a phone queue, where you've been put through, and yet, you're threatened. Like your housing is threatened here, possibly. By the time they get through that phone tree, or by the time they get to a live person, this is a real issue. And so
Yes.
when if they're saying, "Wait, I'm going to go and make a comment," there's stuff to really sort through to understand the dynamic, and it takes a very skilled person on the other side of that phone call to understand that. So, and then, the second thing is in my own storytelling here to kind of help set the platform and really show exactly what you're talking about here is, I've called our phone lines for our staff that when we work with housing authorities, and I've tested our own people, like because I know the reports, I know exactly when the peak times are. And so I have called during peak time to see how our staff respond. And I have actually timed it to say, how long does it take me to get through the line? How long does it take for me to talk to a real person? And were they helpful? And how did I feel after that phone call? And I bring that up because I challenge people in the housing authority, if you're in leadership, even if you don't supervise the people who answer the phones, do you know how your people are picking up the phones?
Right.
You
Totally.
know Yeah, do you know as a leadership team, as a manager, have you called to see how your people sound and how that process, how the, system and how the people, you know how that's working? And that's a real call to action, for leadership of housing authorities too.
Yes. Definitely with maintenance too, how that work order process, is it clear, especially on the weekends, it seems like that's when the risk happens on the weekends. Is the emergency line really, is someone answering? Is somebody going to show up at my property? And, I've had multiple agencies where a resident will post, their, water flooding in their unit because, they haven't been able to get anyone.
Yeah.
And, reaching those numbers need to be communicated. It needs to be an easy process for residents to get to when they need something, or they will, you know, um, there will be a ripple effect, because once one resident starts complaining online, somebody's going to chime in and say, me too. So we don't want that.
Yeah. Well, Tiffany, I really appreciate you joining this conversation. I appreciate what you're doing for the housing authorities and for affordable housing. So hopefully our listeners are taking notes of the tips of what they should be doing better in their own storytelling and their own marketing. And they're really just the affirmation of affordable housing. So and if they can reach you through, we'll tag you in all the links, and so they know how to find you and reach you to help them along. So thank you so much, Tiffany. Again, I've been talking with Tiffany Dickerson, who is known as the housing highlighter through her company Interest Platforms. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Changemakers with Katie Gore. To find out more about Katie, go to quadel.com. That's QUADEL.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.